Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at a pair of pistols that are going to be in their upcoming April of 2020 premiere auction. These are very influential and extremely rare guns. They're a model of 1909 and a model of 1910, both iterative steps towards what would eventually be adopted as the model of 1911 automatic pistol. Now, if we pick up our story where we last left off, we had the model of 1907, 200 of these pistols sent out for a year-long field trial by the US Cavalry. And when the reports came back, they weren't all that good. Well, the good news for Colt and John Browning is that while that trial was still ongoing, Browning kept working. And Browning would go ahead and invent a new style of locking system that would be a significant improvement in these guns. And he showed up in August of 1909, August 23rd, 1909, at Fort Myer, Virginia, with a model of 1909 pistol, and basically said, hey, let's run this through your trials. And he did, and it worked pretty well. Where the 1907, well, the 1905, which is basically this without a grip safety, had gone through this trial as part of the big 1907 pistol trials, had 24 malfunctions in a 500-round endurance test. This guy had 1. That's a big improvement. Now, there were still some flaws to be worked out, but this is clearly what was going to lead the way. So let's bring the camera in because I want to show you these guns up close. This, I think, is actually the gun that was tested first on August 23rd, 1909. The biggest fundamental mechanical thing that Browning changed was actually, well, the whole operating system of the pistols. So if I take the slide off of this, there we go, this model of 1907, you can see how these, the 1905 and the 1907 pistols, along with, in fact, all of the Colt locked breech automatics before that, the 1900s and the 1902s, the barrel is attached to the frame by 2 separate pins, and the whole barrel pivots up and back when the action cycles. You can see that the locking lugs are actually cut all the way around the barrel, and with the model of 1909, Browning would change this, and he would go to the modern system that we are used to, where the barrel has a bushing at the front, and it has a single link pin that holds it in place, and the barrel actually tips up and down instead of dropping in a linear manner. This was a substantial improvement in the gun. Now, that wasn't the only change. In addition to that, the slide stop was incorporated into the link pin here. Again, that's the system that we're used to today. One of the big changes, particularly helpful for the cavalry, was the redesign of the magazine catch. So the 1909 introduced this frame-mounted magazine catch that you can operate with your thumb. Well, I guess if you're right-handed, you operate it with your thumb. If you're left-handed, you operate it with your trigger finger. The previous guns, the 1907s, had a magazine release on the bottom that you pull forward and pull the magazine out. And cavalry troopers, who were the ones who did the testing on this, complained that this was always a two-handed operation. You couldn't reload the gun with one hand. Well, with the new magazine system, you can at least unload it with one hand. The 1909 also introduced the firing pin retaining plate back here, which would carry over to the 1911. It does still have an external extractor there, but we're incrementing our way towards the final 1911 design. You'll notice it also has a retaining plate here to hold these pins in place, and it does not yet have a thumb safety. This is still a gun that only has a grip safety on it. Now, as this gun progressed through the whole series of trial steps in August of 1909, it was doing pretty well. And there are about 10 different things that are tested. So basic function check, an endurance check, a sand test, an acid test where they dunk the gun in acid and then basically let it rust overnight and then come back and see if it works, an accuracy test, all this sort of stuff. Well, it did pretty well. It actually passed the sand test. After being in a chamber full of blowing sand, it was able to function as a self-loader. When it came to the acid test, however, it didn't work, and it failed because the slide stop broke. Browning said that was due to a machining defect, and he went back to fix it, and he came back a little while later. There was a second formal test performed on the model 1909, not this pistol this time, but a different pistol. And in that second test, it ran through a 1,000-round endurance test without a single malfunction. And that was getting very encouraging to the military. So all in all, there were only 23 of the Model 1909s made because they were never submitted to a large-scale test like the 1907s. Even as the testing of the 1909 is going on, Colt and Browning are continuing to improve the gun. And one of the objections they had gotten was over the grip angle. This is a relatively squared off grip, and a lot of guys thought it would be better if there was a little more angle to it. They felt it shot low in rapid fire, and a more angled grip would fix that. So Browning came up with that. That is the model of 1910. In addition to the grip angle that we're used to seeing here, this also integrated the new internal extractor. So there's no longer an extractor sitting on the outside of the slide like we have here. That's been moved inside along with that firing pin retaining plate. The mainspring was combined into a single unit. So before, on the 1909 and earlier, there were two separate springs in here, and they're now a single 3-part spring that you'll recognize from disassembling a 1911. Now, these pistols did not originally have a thumb safety. That was actually added after the next round of testing. There were only somewhere between 8 and 12 Model 1910s manufactured, and so they would go back and forth and be upgraded a bit as trials progressed. The 1910 would be the subject of a major formal competitive trial between the two last contenders in this pistol adoption program at this point. And this point is, by the way, February of 1910. Those last two contenders standing were the Savage and the 1911. Both pistols had undergone a 200-gun year-long field trial, and they'd been able to make improvements to the design based on the results from that trial. So, of course, John Browning did a lot even before the trial was over. He evolved his design from the 1907 to this. The Savage automatic pistol also went its own improvements, although not as fundamental as the 1911, and as we'll see, not as successful. So the intention was to have the final trial take place on November 10th, 1910, and that would include a 6,000-round endurance trial along with all the other elements, a sand test, an acid test, an accuracy test, and the like. On that 6,000-round trial, the 1910 had 15 malfunctions and 4 broken parts. By the way, for this test, it had been updated to include a thumb safety. The biggest reason for this was cavalry troops were concerned that if you fired a few rounds but didn't empty the gun, there was really no safe way to reholster the thing. They didn't trust holstering it with the hammer cocked on a live round and only the grip safety to prevent it from discharging. The manual safety, the thumb safety here, that eased people's minds, and they were happy with that. So that's why this got added to the 1910s, most of them, and to the 1911 design. At any rate, the 1910 had 15 malfunctions in a 6,000-round endurance test. That's pretty darn good even by today's standards, but it wasn't sufficient. And by the way, the Savage had even more problems. So the government came back and said, you know what? Neither of these is sufficient for adoption at this time, and we're going to come back in about 6 months, and we're going to do it again. And they scheduled a new test for March 15th of 1911. Colt and Browning came back with a pistol where they'd fixed the issues that had given rise to their malfunctions, none of which were all that serious. They came back for another round of testing, including another 6,000-round endurance test, which, by the way, took more than 12 hours to do. That's a lot of ammo to put through a pistol. And on that final test, the model of 1910 passed with absolutely no malfunctions. And that is when it was formally approved for adoption by the US military. So that is the story of how we ended up with the model of 1911 pistol. I think it's a pretty cool story, and it's certainly a cool story to be able to illustrate with 2 of the actual guns that were involved in that testing, 2 of the very rare ones. They're, of course, both coming up here at Rock Island, along with a whole bunch of other guns, so you can check out their auction catalog to see all the goodies on all the different stuff. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.